The most shocking detail from the lawsuit filed against Rick Joyner by an abuse victim is the allegation that he influenced the child to not report the crime to the police. The exact text was, Joyner knew of these assaults, yet helped orchestrate the victims to not report the crimes to law enforcement. Until this statement was released through the court filing, the presumption had been that Joyner had plausible deniability regarding crimes by anyone at Morningstar. He had not been accused of personally committing a crime, and the public did not have reason to believe he had broken the law. But the lawsuit says he covered it up. The suit does not say in detail what exactly he did, or provide any evidence of the alleged cover-up, but we can reasonably assume the attorney who wrote the complaint would not have made a very serious allegation without a reliable source. The lawyer in fact noted the cover-up could be a crime. He said, "The admonition not to contact the authorities when someone has been sexually assaulted is reckless, and it could be a criminal offense punishable by incarceration." This may be an understatement because it is well established in the United States that ministers have a duty to report crimes against children, and in some states it is a legal obligation. In North Carolina, any person or institution who has cause to suspect that a child under the age of 18 is abused, neglected, or dependent, must make a report to the County Department of Social Services. This is called universal mandated reporting. Some states require only certain professionals to make reports, but in North Carolina the duty to report extends to everyone. The law states, any person or institution who knowingly fails to report the case of a juvenile, or who knowingly prevents another person from making a report, is guilty of a Class 1 misdemeanor. The lawyer did not say that he reported Joyner to the police to start an investigation to determine if his failure to report was illegal. His point was that after the first incident of child abuse at his organization, Joyner knew there was a risk at Morningstar that other children could be abused, so his client should have been protected. The lawsuit says the cover-up happened in the 2000s. What most people don't know is that a similar allegation was made online in 2007, that Joyner and another leader covered up another crime against a minor. Although the person who made the allegation said he was a senior pastor, it was not clear if the charge was true. But now that this new legal document has formalized a similar old allegation, it is worth revisiting the 2007 story to see if it corroborates the 2024 legal complaint. 20 years ago, the internet was a different landscape. When someone wanted to research a ministry to do an informal background check, they could simply Google it and then find public discussions on internet forums. You can still do that today, of course, but back then, when everybody used a desktop computer instead of a smartphone, reading and typing were easier, so the quantity and quality of internet postings was much greater. You could share a personal experience and post a simple question, and then lots of people would respond sharing their own experience or opinions. You would see longer posts with more detail and depth, and even megathreads of discussions with many pages of posts on the same subject. We're going to look at an example of this where someone posted their story about the International House of Prayer, and review the comments of a senior pastor about a cover-up by Mike Bickle and Rick Joyner. On the Cult Education website at culteducation.com, there was an open forum with a section called Cults, Sects, and Religious Movements. On September 6, 2006, a poster started a new thread entitled, "My Recent Visit to IHOP in Kansas City." He said that the previous night he had attended a public meeting to hear what Bickle had to say. There was a time of praise and worship, and he wanted to pray for some people there, but he was not allowed to. His complaint was that IHOP is very controlling and he felt they had committed spiritual abuse. He concluded by asking, "Anybody else know anything about this bunch?" And so began a forum discussion that continued for 20 pages with different people sharing their experiences and opinions. Both critics and supporters of IHOP debated the value of the organization and its leader. The discussion included significant input from the moderator of the forum, who was an expert on cults. Near the end of the discussion, on the 17th page, a senior pastor joined the conversation and shared a disturbing story about Mike Bickle and Rick Joyner. On June 24, 2007, he said, "Accountability or the lack thereof is a very significant factor when examining groups like IHOP, or leaders like Mike Bickle. I was present at IHOP when Paul Cain was outed by Rick Joyner, Jack Deere, and Mike Bickle. As a minister of the gospel for over 30 years, I had stopped at IHOP while traveling, and was privy to the inner circle of IHOP, and its cover-up of what I considered to be a criminal matter. When Mike Bickle and others exposed Paul Cain, they did it in a way that covered up their own sin. I had youth in this movement tell me that they had been sexually abused by Paul Cain years before the exposure. It was well known by Bickle and Joyner that this was going on. They made a choice to cover it up. When I told the leadership that it was required by law to report this to the authorities if there was even a remote possibility that a victim could have been underage, they attacked me. Their response was that if I said anything to anyone, they would destroy me and my ministry. In one specific case of an abused youth, I informed them that this person had all the classic signs present before a mental breakdown. I told them that it was fine to pray for Paul, but what about the victims? They told me that the victim was fine, and who was I to tell them what to do? This ministry not only infects the body of Christ nationally, but internationally, and does so because there is no one to call them down. The matter of Paul Cain is of importance, because not only was there sexual sin, but also with another of their infamous prophets, as well as open drug use, alcohol use, and sexual sin amongst youth. I began to wonder why no one investigated this serious matter, until I realized that to do so would affect so many supporting churches and ministries. I believe this shows emphatically the consequences of the lack of accountability in so many corporation churches. No one in the body of Christ fully investigated this matter. It was said by one of the leaders at IHOP that Paul Cain had threatened to expose what he knew about many leaders in the body, and that they had to shut down the problem quickly. Apathy prevents the complete exposure of this problem to this day. Many sit and discuss IHOP's theology, which should be fully looked into, while missing this matter of Paul Cain. Leaders in this matter have stated openly that they knew of Paul Cain's problems years before his exposure, and ignored it. This abuse story by the senior pastor in 2007, condemning Paul Cain, is consistent with his statement that Joyner knew about Cain abusing children long before he was publicly exposed in 2004. If Joyner was covering for Cain, it is not surprising he would also cover for Morningstar. The pastor's testimony suggests that Bickle and Joyner allowed Cain to abuse boys for years before he was finally exposed, so that other ministries would not be exposed. But he did not say if these ministries included IHOP and Morningstar. If that's in fact the case, then it says at one point Joyner had to search his heart and make a decision. Should I say nothing and keep my ministry, or shut down Morningstar to save the children? IHOP found out about the cult forum discussion and a staff member responded to the senior pastor's serious allegation. He was very defensive of the controversial ministry and its leader. The pastor then confronted him in a detailed rebuttal over 3,000 words long, with a comment he had received directly from an expert. He said, "I have talked directly to youth in IHOP who were abused sexually by Paul, and one is in fact on staff. After the exposure he was taken by another person on staff to Mike, and the matter was buried. He was offered counseling and help but refused because IHOP told him to stay away from anyone not at IHOP." A professional sexual abuse counselor with a PhD who knew this individual, told me that for every known instance of sexual abuse there were many more instances that were not revealed. After the attorneys in the new lawsuit against Rick Joyner publicly revealed for the first time 2 cases of abuse at Morningstar many years ago, including at least one cover-up, they made this closing statement about additional abuse cases. There is no telling how many others have occurred and were shut down by Morningstar and its leadership.